Welcome. This video is all about Drupal, and what we're going to do is compress a 5-hour job down into as short a time as possible. What I've done is I've got a video taken in a number of separate sessions, and I've doubled the speed. So I'm not that fast a typist or that fast a mover of the mouse. Just bear in mind I'm compressing this down so that it's into a watchable, consumable, digestible piece. Now, what I'm doing here is I'm just going to spend a little bit of time talking about the specification of the application that we're building in Drupal here. And I'm doing this using a drawing tool called draw.io. You can see the URL at the top. And I'm using the UML tool set to describe a few different diagrams, this one specifically being a use case diagram. And I'm listing out my actors. So I've got a person who does surveys. I've got a person who creates a batch of cupcakes, as it turns out. So we're going to create a cupcake survey system, and a baker is going to be involved in baking the cupcakes, obviously, and submitting those cupcakes for review. But the baker themselves can't allow that batch to be approved for surveying until the chef has tried it. The chef can also submit batches for survey, but a baker can bake and request a survey, but a chef has to approve that. And finally, both those two users, the baker and the chef, both have the dubious honor of being able to look at the surveys that were submitted by our surveyor. So in theory, what we've got are some customers. So those customers are involved in obviously eating the product, but also they are invited to partake in some kind of a feedback of the qualities of that product. And I'm making it crystal clear here which actors have access over which use cases. So for example, a baker shouldn't necessarily do surveys, and a chef shouldn't do surveys, even though as far as Drupal is concerned, those surveys will be submitted anonymously. So anonymous users are allowed to create a special survey. And there I'm looking to just enclose our use case diagram in some kind of a box, a frame, and that frame will get a title. So the title of our system is a cupcake survey system, and CSS for short. So that's the end of the first diagram, and it's a 10,000 foot view of the kind of feature sets that we want to include in our site. The second diagram, well, I'm taking a screenshot. Obviously, I want to save that for reference, and I'll include that in the Drupal application, and we'll just call that CSS use case. But we want to move on to the next stage, and that is to describe the data that will be held in our system. So another UML diagram that's very handy is the class diagram. Now, of course, Drupal is an object-oriented system, but we're not going to do any coding. But it might be useful just to formalize the kinds of information that our information system is going to store and represent to users. So there are two objects or two types of information, and they are related. There's a core relationship between them. The batch describes the cupcake and all its features, and the survey is going to be on one of the batches that has been approved. So I'm just listing all of the core features of, let's say, a cupcake. So when it was baked, the superlatives around what that cupcake is all about, including images and any HTML that you want to embed into that text field. Paper color, icing flavor, and sponge flavor are both determining factors, and that will help the surveyor identify which cupcake they just ate against a list of batches that had already been approved for surveying. So we're going to take 4 pieces of statistical evidence and 1 qualitative piece of evidence, and I'm not sure whether I've even included the string that represents comments, so I might have overlooked that, but you can see the survey has a time that took place and the kind of data that's occurred. And what I'm attempting to do now is to draw a little line between those two, because the first option on survey is the batch choice of object batch. So I'm trying to use UML diagrammatic tools, which are object orientated. Things like Java and C++ programmers tend to use UML quite heavily. And I'm shanghaiing that into sort of formalizing the meaning of our system, even though we technically won't be using methods, just the 2 objects with their data types. The third is another UML diagram, which is called the interaction diagram, and I'm going to list out the 4 objects that represent the pieces of data as they flow through our system, and then describe sequentially the kinds of flows that occur during the life cycle of those objects. So the first 2 objects will be the survey, and the first 2 objects will be the batches, and you'll notice I've already made a mistake. I'm about to fall into the same trap that I've just described. And the baker and the chef are involved in the creation of the object called batch. But that batch, to go from draft to published, requires a chef. And you can see here I'm incorrectly using the word survey. I sort of resolve that problem in my head as I go through the creation of this interaction diagram. So the flow vertically from top to bottom is time. So over time, the object moves from draft to published, and there are actors that are involved in moving that object through its life cycle. The second 2 objects on the right hand side represent the survey, and the surveys are done on batches. So here I am fixing my little faux pas. So the survey never gets published. That is, it's never open to the public. It's one of those things that only our chef and our baker are going to use to continually improve their product. And you'll notice that I'm going to draw some more lines to the right. So to the right are the life cycle of the objects, and vertically down is the time span. And you'll notice that I'll have an arrow pointing back that represents once the surveys are in, the chef and the baker will benefit from that data. So there is definitely a feature that needs to be thought about. So I do the interaction diagram when it's not clear in the model, that is the use case diagram or the class diagram, about the way in which the site functions, and this makes it explicit as to really what's going on with our system. And that's sort of the end of the planning stage. So I'm going to sort of export this file out and include it in my planning document. I'll have taken screenshots and whatever else, so that it's all pretty clear as to and then if anyone else takes up the job of implementing this site, they're never in any doubt as to exactly what what the project entails. In fact, you could take some of these diagrams directly back to the client to confirm the feature set of the site and the processes by which we would go about its implementation. So what I'm interested in doing now that the diagrams have been created is to actually look at the finished site. So in hindsight, we still have a number of an hour and a half together at least. We're 10 minutes into the video, and I'd like to take you through what is the finished site and just go through that life cycle to explain to you what's happening with the site. So I've logged in as Baker, and I can list the surveys that are in. I can list all of the cupcakes that have been published, and I can create my own cupcake batch, and that is going to be an item that won't appear on the list of possible surveyed cupcakes until the chef has approved it. So I'm going through and instead of actually baking a cupcake and taking a photo of it, I'm going to use the powers of the internet to pretend. So I've taken an image, and I'm going to just drop that straight into our site, and that can be the one item that was created. So it will be a citrus flavored cupcake with a yellow paper. So so you see there it's in its unpublished state. It's not in the published state, and we want to get it from its unpublished to its published. The baker can make alterations or delete that, but they won't bring that to survey until the chef has logged in and had a look. So you can see here there is no lime, no lemon or citrus cupcake. So now that I've logged in, you can see here there's my my opportunity to move the moderation state or the workflow from its what do you call it, unpublished to its published state. So now you can see a history of the revisions that have been made on that piece of content, and now it has moved from the unpublished to the published state, and that seems to be the resolution. Now I've made a configuration error. That lemon lime does not appear in survey because I've not made a configuration correctly. I think I need to quickly log in as admin and go into the views section and actually change the caching options in views, because if something changes in views, we don't want the cached version. So going back to our logged out state, you can see now that my lemon lime bliss is on the list, and I can choose from the statistical ratings and then leave some kind of comment at the end. As a anonymous user, I can't see the surveys that have come in. I'll need to log in as either a cook or a chef, and then you'll see the surveys that have appeared. This is a rather simple table format. We could probably get some kind of graphing solution together that would show that information, but at this stage we're getting the information system together, and this is the completed application to take to the client. So now we're moving to the beginning of the process of implementation. So 13 minutes into the video, I've explained the specification, I've shown you what our finished solution looks like, and now I'm going to install the software from scratch. So essentially I'm downloading a copy of Drupal, the current 8 tree, version 8, and I'm pulling down probably the 10 or 11 most popular plugins or modules that extend the functionality of Drupal. I didn't use any of them in the creating of the site except for some admin modules. So you may see me download and install these modules, but they weren't technically used. The two modules that are very useful when you're working with a site is the admin toolbar. So we've just pulled down the admin. We're racing through development and entity reference, and a few developer-friendly and user layout-friendly modules, but most of those are useful to look at and get an idea for the kinds of things that Drupal will be in the future. One of the admin toolbars that I've found useful is to have a spotlight like interface, which is the coffee module. So what I'm doing here is I'm just going to go through and pull, extract out and install Drupal into the public HTML folder and prove out that that URL exists. So we have the beginnings of our installation. We've got to change some of the permissions on the server that we're in at the moment. Now, I'm got a version of Apache and MySQL running on this local host. The machine is pretty quick, so not only is it fast at 1.1 speed, but when we double the speed in what's happening here, things happen a little bit quicker. What I'm doing is I'm changing the permissions in the writable areas of the system. So I've got to create a settings folder, permiss that settings folder in a way that the Drupal install will work. Another thing that is a bit unusual about Linux generally is that it has a further security level beyond just file permissions, and this is called SE, or Security Enhanced Linux. And it's I'll put a watch on Apache or HTTPD in this case, writing to file system. So I've got to tell the kernel of the operating system that yes, it's okay to write these files. Apache is allowed. So not only do we have to change the permission of the folder in a traditional sense, but we also have to tell the server in a security enhanced way. So I've pasted in the security level complaints, and I'm just checking that the information that we've unzipped is in the right place. And I think the second line, which is restore con, which is to enable that that permission. So I'll just paste that straight in, hit the enter key, and we should now clear the error, and now we're able to put in the database. Before we actually name that database, we should create one here in phpMyAdmin. It's able to be done on the command line, but sometimes phpMyAdmin's quicker. So Drupal is the database name, root is the username, and there is no password. So in this local host environment, we're free of some of the security constraints. When we send this up to a server, we'll have to have more secure passwords. So now that I've got the database created, I'm creating the first user of the system, so the admin user, and I'm defining their location, and I'm telling the system not to check for updates. So this now is Drupal installed writ large, and we have all of the settings of version 8.2x installed, but what I'm doing is I'm installing the admin toolbar, and I need to enable the admin toolbar and the search utility coffee, and that will then allow me to have a slightly more advanced drop-down menu system that I can navigate quicker to the exact place in the admin area. The link in the black band at the top, go to, shows a little text field where you can start typing in things. So if you're looking for content types or creating new pages, then by all means. So the first thing I'm going to do is create the welcome page, which is the home page, and I want to set it as the home page. So I'll go to basic site settings and change from a view to a static page. So in that respect, what we've done there is just defined the home page to be a specific place. So I've got two browser windows open now. I've got one where I'm authenticated as admin, and I've got another window where I am unauthenticated. And I like to have the two windows open at the same time so that I can see both views, both the end user view, and that's usually sort of a bit of a clean room view. I don't have any extra complexities around the admin toolbar itself. So I'm just picking up the last couple bits of modules. So I need Bootstrap, which is a theme, and the Bootstrap theme is a minimalist developer theme, and it uses the Bootstrap layout engine. Now I can't install it directly. I need to actually create a sub theme, and that's what I'm doing here. Is I'm going to the command line, and I'm going to copy out a folder inside the Bootstrap theme, which is a starter kit, and that starter kit is a subsection of the entire site, so, or the theme itself. So I can upgrade the theme, but all my configurations, all of my customizations will be in a separate folder and configured in a separate way. And I'm just going to follow verbatim the 6 steps that you see here on the screen, and I'll highlight them just so that as I work through them, I know that they're done. So I've made the starter kit theme in a new folder, but now I've got to rename files and directories. So anything with capital THEME and AME, I've got to rename to my new folder, which my new file name, which will be something like cupcake_bs, so which is short for Bootstrap, not what you might think it is. So all of the files that I'm currently using that have theme name in them, I'm just moving to a new place. I'm also going to have to edit some of these files just to ensure that those new directory folder names and file names are enshrined in configuration also. And what that does is it allows me to enable this sub theme directly in the user interface. So there's a few steps, and it's important to read the README because the theme contains a number of pieces. It contains CSS, which is obviously the first step you would go to if you were going to change the look and feel of a site. But it also contains templates, and those templates define the layout of pages, where blocks will go and where footers are constructed. And if you have to change something, or you might want to add something to your site, editing those templates will be necessary, and it's necessary in this case to lay out the page in a more beautiful way. And we'll get to that towards the end of the video, where most of the last half hour of this video is dedicated just to hacking CSS and tweaking those templates. So I do edit the main template, and if you want to scrub all the way towards the last half hour and it's just CSS you want to check out, then by all means. But in the intervening time, we're going to focus on building the functionality. And as we work through that functionality, I'll slowly fix certain parts of the look and feel. So you might find some intertwining layout issues that I uncover as I'm working through the functionality of the site. So I'm just reading through all the little warnings and complaints, and if I hit refresh now, you should see that Cupcake BS that I'm now installing as a core theme. Now if I hit the refresh key, the whole site changes. The whole theme has now been completely changed. And I want to confirm in my mind that that theme not only has been enabled, but also when I edit some of the CSS, that will change also, which it doesn't do without a couple of tweaks, a couple of configurations. So I'm madly hitting refresh here. One trick is to hold down Control-Shift refresh, and that sometimes gets the browser to call the latest version. So I'm just checking my CSS, making sure that's not erroneous. I'm opening up my developer toolbar, checking that I've got my body laid out correctly. But you can see here that new background still hasn't been allocated in the body selector. So I've actually got to go back to the admin panel and actually change the configuration of Drupal itself. So not only have I changed body, but I've also changed the H1, the welcome there, to an olive green, just to be 100% sure that when I do change my configurations that things will go good. So if you have a look at development, the first thing I want to do is turn off that aggregation. So you don't want to aggregate. Those are for speed related issues. So once I've cleared the cache and I've turned off aggregation, my new CSS file is working fine. So I've got the light blue and the olive green all working correctly. So I should be able to start doing some continuous improvement as I work through the functionality of the site. What you see, because we're in Australia, there's obviously a date reconfiguration, and if you're in Europe, then there would be an issue with your configuration, or Asia for that matter. Because the default seems to be set to the United States with month, day, year. So I'm going through all of the default date formats and just reverting them from month, day, year to day, month, year. There's a whole lot of others, but I'm hoping that those first three, the defaults, should suffice. I do actually add another later on in the video to remove the hours and the minutes. So there is some view situations where it may be necessary for you to change date format and then use your own customized format of date. So this red area here shows all of the modules that I downloaded, and I think in turn I'll just extract them out into the Drupal environment and enable some of them. So for example, Chaos Tools and Path Auto are quite handy for extra features in the site. So what I'm going through now is I'm enabling some of the modules that are built in, core modules, and then some of the experimental modules. Specifically, the one that we're going to use will be workflows. So that's the last one down the bottom that I'm just about to tick here. If you're in a multi-language environment, you might want to choose some of the multilingual modules, but in this case I won't. So Path Auto is not too bad because you can set a friendly URL when you create your static pages. So I'm just extracting out, you can see here, CTools tests, token tests, and they will all represent different pieces of modularity. So Path Auto needed an extra module, so I'm hitting the internet to find that one more module that I need, which I think is actually a built-in module. I'm not sure whether it's actually here as downloadable one. Double check. So Path is installed, CTools is missing, and if I just update and then go down to Path Auto and splay that out, that seems to work. So I should be able to, Chaos Tools and Path Auto should work fine. So there is an error at the top that relates to security. And quite often when you have these installations, eventually your site will realize that it's not the latest version. And that's a whole other procedure to update your Drupal site when it falls behind in security updates. And a safe way of doing that as well. So I've just taken the site into maintenance mode. I'm going to do a sort of a quick backup of the site, just so that if anything goes really wrong in starting my configuration, I won't lose the work that I've done so far. So it's a little bit like saving a Word document or saving an Excel spreadsheet. we're just going to quickly back it up. And I'm looking at the error because it says trusted host settings. There's a setting that you can change in settings.php to tell the Drupal system to only listen to domain requests on a certain certain domain. So you don't want your site to pretend to be any other sites. And this is to resolve a cross-site scripting issue. In fact, this will be broken when I change it from example.com to localhost. So localhost is the domain from which this site will be hosted in its development stages. But if it's taken up onto the internet, I'm going to have to change that settings file to make it work properly. So all I'm doing is just cleaning out any errors or any sort of gotcha errors that appear at the top of the admin panel, which can just be a bit disconcerting when you see them. So we've pretty much got our site set up. We've got our theme. We've got some modules. Now we can go into the process of creating some content. Now that content will need to be in certain specific formats. So like we said in the planning, we're going to have to create 2 new content types, and those content types will be along the lines of a survey and a batch. I'm sorry, the MySQL dump file command that I've just executed was to back up the site. So I've put the site into maintenance mode, cleared the caches, and I'm just quickly backing it up so that I don't have any boo-boos going forward in my content creation. In fact, I can keep that to be a little bit further ahead of installations in the future. So what am I doing here? I'm managing my blocks, and blocks are a way of laying out certain pieces of content, such as header and footer and sidebar. And all I'm doing is I'm cleaning out pretty much the sidebar from the environment, and I'm dragging some of the materials or disabling some of the materials from the site. So the little piece of advertising that says Drupal I've pulled out. I'm putting search right up the top into the navigation. Powered by Drupal can go and get lost and removed. Every time I remove something, I realize that I hadn't saved the drags that I'm making. So I can drag changes around, but I have to remember to save them because without saving they won't stay into the system. So let's create our first content type. So we're going to create a batch, and a batch will be cupcakes that have been baked by a baker or a chef. And we just need to have data going into those content types that are going to look like the pieces of data that we planned upon. So for example, I need the date that the cupcake was baked. That's not the date this piece of content was created, because that's a piece of metadata that is attached to this content when it's created. So it might transpire that we made the cupcake late last night, so we have to put yesterday down as our date baked. And I'm making sure that the date baked is going to be a date and not a date time. So we're only interested in the day that the cupcake was baked, not whether it was 2 in the afternoon or 2 in the morning. So one thing about Drupal that makes it pretty powerful is that you can define workflows. You can define the way in which data is created and transition from different states. So I'm playing around with transitions, and I'm just sort of describing 2 types of workflows and 2 different transitions in each one of the workflows that represent the way in which both surveys and batches are going to be handled. So anyway, I need to define in that content types configuration how moderation is handled. So moderation and workflow are used interchangeably in this site. So I've defined the way in which that data will be moderated, i.e. the workflow from baker to chef, i.e. from a draft to a published state. So what I'm doing here is I'm making sure that the content type has a couple of drop-down lists that represent the flavors of both the icing and the sponge. And this information is common between those two pieces of data. So the flavor of the icing and the flavor of the sponge could be the same, or they could be different, but they're pulled from the same pick list. So what we're doing here is we're creating a vocabulary or a taxonomy to store that information, and we can then use that taxonomy throughout the content management system, i.e. different content types could have the same taxonomy. And if I wanted to add an extra flavor, I don't have to go to two content types or two fields to change that taxonomy. I can just go to that source configuration of taxonomy. So I'm trying to think of all of the different flavors that we could go into a cupcake, barring, of course, hot chili peppers or garlic. And there's the list there of that taxonomy. So I want to go back into my content types and add the field that uses the taxonomy. So you can see that I'm renaming flavor to a more specific icing flavor. And that icing flavor is going to have the taxonomy that was created separate to the content type itself. I'm having all kinds of trouble spelling at the moment. And there's the flavors choice of my taxonomy, but I'm going to create two. I'm going to create the sponge flavor and the icing flavor, and hopefully I'll get that U out of there before I hit the submit button. There we go. And I'm going to use exactly the same taxonomy that I used for icing flavor. And I need to tell it, instead of autocomplete, to pick from a total number of options. So by default, it's an autocomplete. I type C for chocolate and chocolate comes up, but instead I want a drop-down list that appears. So I thought that a second taxonomy might be useful to describe the color of the paper that would be used in the cupcake. Again, you're probably making a little bit more work for yourself in the first instance to maybe save some work in the future. So if you spend the time setting up taxonomies, it might come back to you in saved time when it comes to configuring more pieces of the content management system's features against that core taxonomy. So again, I'm not using flavors this time. I'm using the paper color and changing autocomplete to a select list. I can define layout. That's one of the external modules, or one of the plugin modules that I think is in the experimental area of Drupal itself. And you can see here I am creating, or just going through the throes of creating, a piece of content that that will contain the information that I've configured. So I'm dipping out to the internet and just grabbing the first cupcake that I see, using my clipping tool or my select tool to marquee out a piece of a cupcake, and just including it in this site itself. So I can go to my pictures and add a cupcake. I need some alternative text, and then saving it into the content. So that doesn't really achieve an outcome in terms of workflow, because we haven't configured either the users or permissions or workflows properly yet. I'm just proving out that the site actually creates a content type. And you note there that I've come to the realization that that particular date format system's not good enough, because it's showing hours and minutes as a feature of the output. So I'm dipping down to the date and time to create a new date format based on an existing one. So I'll take the default short date and paste in everything except for that without any time. So I end up with the default short date redefined to be super short, and I should be able to then go into my configuration again and change date to no time. Have a look at that content, and the time has been taken away. I don't like the lack of padding between the two columns. So I've got an image on the left, and I think I've defined it to be on the left. So that would be float left. So I've just added some padding around the image. That might come back and bite me if there are other images used on the site. But for the moment, we'll move forward with that. So we've got a content type. We've got taxonomy. We've got one piece of content based on that. What I need to do now is to list all of the cupcake batches in a view. And a view can be a query of the system to ask, show me all of that follow these criteria. So this is the shortest, sweetest, happiest view that I've created, which just says, show me all of the cupcake batches. Now, I'm trying to debug this at the moment because no batches came up, and I'm wondering whether the workflow is at fault because the batch is in an unpublished state, and by default the view is only going to show batches that have been published. So there may be a shortcoming in the way I've set up my workflow, because there is no way in which I'm able to change that workflow from draft to published. So I'm going back to check my survey approval process, and I'm going to simplify things down such that there are only two states, and I need to move from draft to publish. So I think I'm just going to delete them initially and simplify everything down so that I only have two states and I create two new workflows. So I want to move from draft to published as a workflow. And that's pretty much it. So now I should be able, as admin anyway, to change the workflow from draft to published. So now I have that piece of content published, and you can see here in my view that content appears nicely. Now, I still haven't gone through the permissions of that workflow. Obviously, the admin that I'm using here has God mode. It's allowed to do anything, but I'll need to sort of define Chef's role in being able to take a piece of content from draft to published. Now that I've created the view has a link, the view has an address. I can paste that in. I can define the title. I forgot the prefixing slash there. And you can see here it's now a link that can be clicked on in the main menu. And I'm going to do that for a couple of views and a couple of add content types. So when I add a survey or when I add a batch, I need a menu item for it. When I list batches in draft or I list batches in published, I need a link for that also. So the menu system will be integral, and I'm going to manually configure those as I see fit. I'm having a bit of a scratch around looking at, fav icons. I'm searching for the fav icon. I've downloaded a cupcake at some point, and I can't seem to locate it. But I'll find it on another computer and go through the installation there, because these fav icons are, indigenous to Drupal itself. And a favicon, if you don't know, is that blue head that appears in the top of all of the tabs of my browser at the moment. I've got a lovely little pixelized cupcake that I want to replace it with. And the same will go with a SVG image that will replace the purple B in Bootstrap for a cupcake. We'll get that in eventually. So I'm having a fiddle with a new content type. So we're working on the survey side of things now, and survey will consist mainly of data, statistical data from 1 to 10. So 1 being the worst, 10 being the best. So I'm going through the 4 different features of cupcake flavor, cupcake presentation, icing flavor, overall taste, and just defining a range from 1 to 10 on those different statistical features. And as I said before, if you're going to save these as numerals or numbers specifically, it then is possible for you to maybe graph out overall answers and get some statistically significant information from building the survey system itself. So I'm going through each one of those 4, pasting in that 1 to 10 list, and just labeling things so that they're clear for anyone else who might come along. Some of the information I'm putting in here might not be viewable by end users. If you mouse over some of these, you might see them as mouse over information in the forms as you fill them out. So I'm repasting in these dates so that, these numbers, so that we have sort of a clarity for the end users to know that 1 is poor and 10 is fabulous, just so that they're pretty clear on what that range is. I don't want to try and sort of presuppose what people are going to put in, but nonetheless, it's useful to tell the user what 1 is, as opposed to what 10 is. I'm continuing to play with workflows here, because I know that the actual survey is never going to go into the published state. So I'm going to enshrine that and enforce that by defining a workflow that ensures that content never gets published. It's a cheaty way to ensure that content never gets out to the rest of the world. There may be better ways, both in permissions and maybe user roles, but we'll just go straight up with defining a workflow. So we pretty much have that content type done, and I'm changing the layout of the look of the form just so that it sort of scrubs up a little bit better, and we make sure that the order of information appearing both at form and at output doesn't look so ugly, and we have the comments at the end rather than the top. And I'm making another view. So the batch history is one view, but we need another set of views which include showing the batches that are not published. We need another view to create a relationship between the survey and the batch itself. So there will be a few other views to create. We'll spend a bit more time in views as time goes on, but that survey content is just being beautified a little bit and cleaned up to make sure that we have navigation ability to the create survey, the show batches, the show surveys type pages. So we're tending to grow out our menus. And you'll find that in certain situations, those menus will not show if the user doesn't have permission to see them. So you'll find that I start playing with content types. So for example, I'm going to be careful and make sure that the user has the ability to do things. So the one piece of permission is to give anonymous users the right to put in a survey. So there's that content type, and I've submitted a survey, and hopefully if I look at my content, I now have a new survey that's been created. I'm just changing again the order of things and trying to push out the size, but of course the Bootstrap template won't let me do that. I've got to go in and sort of override some of the behaviors of the layout engine that are squashing my site's ability to change size of forms. So I'm creating new users, or roles in this case. So I've got two roles, a baker and a chef. They'll both have the same user name. So I'll create a test user called chef and a test user called baker. But at this moment in time, I'm going through and configuring their rights to access different content. So the chef obviously has a lot more rights over batch than does the baker. So the baker can edit some of their own stuff, but they certainly can't delete or bring some of that content to published. And there's another area for that under workflows or transitions that need to be handled. And it's the same with survey. We don't want anyone to edit the survey in any way whatsoever. We just want users to create, or anonymous users to create new drafts. So I'm creating my chef and I'm creating my baker. And you'll note that down the bottom there, I'm going to change the role so that particular user inhabits the role. And I'm putting, very insecure passwords in, but they just prove out a concept. So I've got two users under the two new roles, and if I go incognito or use a completely new browser in this case, so I've got Chrome on one end and Firefox on the other, I should log in as Baker.
Except this account Baker doesn't seem to have the permissions set correctly. There is a missing submit button from the user interface. So I'm in Firefox at the moment, and I'm just having a look at the HTML CSS just to identify whether the form actually has a submit button in hidden way. Just to identify whether it's a styling issue or whether it's actually a configuration issue. So I've gone back to the admin area and I'm double checking my permissions because, while the user may have the permissions to create a batch or edit a batch or delete a batch, that user can't bring workflow into draft or published. And there is actually another area that relates to workflow further up that talks about bringing the item from different states of publication. So you can see here there is a transition permission that I need to set. So in order for the batch to actually be submitted, I've got to be able to create a new draft. So both Baker and Chef should be able to create a new draft, but only Chef is allowed to bring that transition to a published state. So there are others that are related to the survey that I'll need to configure later, but I'm hoping that particular configuration change seems to work. So I'm double checking the actual workflow itself to see whether there is a problem, because there's two states: there's draft and published, and that's the state to bring the item from draft to publish. So what I'm going to do is redefine that workflow so that there is an approved state, and we can create a new draft specifically. So I'm just checking through the different states, ensuring that I have the right two types of state changes that are allowed to occur. So we can define these two areas more succinctly in the workflow itself. So now I'm just double checking the permissions on that and making sure that the baker has the right permissions to move between published states. So I'll create a new survey transition. Both baker and chef should get that. So I'm going to hit the save on that, and hopefully when I refresh, I get the all-important submit button. So now I'm pretty confident I have that little green submit button down the bottom, and I'm going to fill out the details around a cupcake, and I'll hit the net just to grab another studio picture of a beautiful strawberry cupcake. Get my trusty screenshot tool, marquee a selection of a cupcake with a little bit of peppermint on the top, and give it a name, drop it in my images folder, and then dutifully upload that using my Firefox browser that I happen to be logged in as the baker. So I'm allocating alt image, aligning it to the left, giving it some statistics, but you'll notice that the strawberry cupcake is in an unpublished state. Baker has created it, but Baker can't take that unpublished document and go further. So I'm opening incognito in Chrome, and I'm going to log in as chef and just check that workflow works. But you can see I don't actually have a listing of all of the cupcakes that are in draft. So I'm going to have to go back and create a view that shows me all of the cupcakes that are in draft only. So I'm creating a new page that represents all the batches that are in an unpublished state. And of course, only chefs and bakers will be able to see those drafts. So they won't go to survey. So I'm changing the query a little bit, making sure that the query says that the published status is equal. Oops, what have I done? Yeah, the published status will be draft. So there's a strange little if statement that I've defined. The next step is to actually give it a menu. So I'm proving out that it works. I have a URL, unpublished batches. I need to take that unpublished batch and make it into the menu. But you can see now that the chef has access to unpublished batches list. They can change the workflow. So there's a workflow menu at the top of each one of those items. So let's create the menu item and paste in the link. So I'm gonna, okay. So draft batches appears in the menu system, and I should, as chef, see all the draft batches. Okay, so we've got pretty much the the permission set once again for that user to access all of the different batch types. So we're kind of wondering why there's a permission denied coming up. It doesn't make sense off the top of my head. Yeah, there's a couple of objects in the permissions table there that sort of gives you a warning saying careful with this one. It seems to have too much power. So you can give users the right to access all content. It's like a little get out of jail free card. But for some reason, the baker doesn't have access to, that's rather consistent. So the baker shouldn't be able to access drafts that they don't have control over. So I'm searching for a permission that doesn't exist. But what I'm interested in is getting the transition from unpublished to published using the chef user. So I might attempt to log in again. You can see there anonymous can access draft batches. That doesn't seem right. So I'm changing the access permissions of the view itself. So you can go into view and say, look, the person that's allowed to view this, or the type of role that's allowed to view this is restricted. So I noticed that anonymous users can see the actual unpublished list, the view, but not actually the individual unpublished items. So it may be important for me to just change the permissions of the view separate to the permissions of the individual objects. And you can go in and change it based on role. So what I'm looking at here is the permissions of the view that are related to content. So so you can see here there's sort of a listing of all of the draft items, but no ability to see the actual content itself. So I'm having a sort of a bit of a click around and trying to get the permissions to work. That's a user that has no access whatsoever. So we're having a look at the different options for batch and constantly sort of flying back to this permissions area to just confirm that the different settings that were set for access to batch are set correctly. But when you find that we've talked about three things now, we've talked about access permissions to the content itself, access permissions to transition between different states of published or unpublished, and also we can change permissions on the views themselves, so that there's permission states all over the content management system. It's not all a centrally located list like you see here. You do actually have to go around the different areas of the content management system to manage its different view states. So I'm checking the transition states to make sure that all of the different content types have the right permissions, but I'm probably going to swing back to views again and change views by role rather than by content type. So this is the anonymous user, completely anonymous. They have no access. There's a bit of a login giveaway in the top right hand corner there, and if you can see here, I'm in a incognito, but I have logged in as a specific user. So I'm having a look at some of the access denied errors. The log files tend to give you a bit of an idea as to the kind of failing that has occurred, so you can get an idea for the different people, especially in production. You can get an idea for the different people that have tried to sort of penetrate your site in different ways. But logs can be useful from a debugging perspective. and that's under the report section of the content management system. So just bear in mind that there's a number of ways of trying to debug. Not only is your observation in different incognito views useful, but also have a look at the logs that are generated. It can be useful to sort of dig in underneath the hood and have a look at the server log. So the MySQL logs or the Apache logs can give you some idea as to what's going on, especially when you're looking at 404 types or 500 types of error. They can give you a bit of a better idea for what might be going on. So I'm still sort of zeroing in on the exact reason why I'm getting an access denied when I try to view a specific content, and it is related to the view area of the site, and we'll get there. So I've kind of given up permissions, and I want to push forward and deal with a specific area of what makes Drupal, in my mind, the best content management system for building information systems, and that is to create a relationship between two different content. Because you have your batches, which represent the things that were baked, but when you do a survey, you're surveying on what? You have to sort of define from a drop-down list what survey or what specific cupcake batch you're surveying. So I'm going in here and I'm creating a specific view called entity reference, and an entity reference view is a special type of view which only shows things in other things. So I'll explain when I manage the content type called survey. But in this particular area, I'm just going to edit up the entity reference settings so that I can filter only for cupcakes that are no older than 4 days. So the individual shouldn't do a survey on a 1-month-old cupcake, or so there is a sort of a definite lifespan to the cupcake that they are going to survey. So what I'm saying here is I'm saying I don't want to list anything that's any greater than -5 days. So anything that's -5 days or less is okay. So if it's more than 5 days, then that means that the cupcake's too moldy and can't be surveyed upon. So I'm going to dip down here and I'm going to look for a reference. I'm going to reference a piece of content, and that content is going to be from a different content type. So I'm only going to limit the content to one item. So I don't want the user to sort of enter in 2 or 3. And here's where I change the entity reference. So I'm going to filter by an entity reference and only show the things that came from that other content type. So I'll call it batch choice, and you can see views, and I select the one view that I've created that is an entity reference. So that batch option, choose a cupcake you just ate, and that is not autocomplete. It should be from a select list. So now what we should see when we go incognito and when we incognito not logged in, one of the survey items will be what different cupcake do you want to survey. So I need to change the order of the fields so that that batch option appears further up the list. So the first thing they're doing is choosing the batch, and then they're rating, and finally they're putting some comments in at the end. So I want to give create new content permission for survey to the anonymous user. So it's an unusual situation in content management system terms to actually give end users the right to create content on our system. But just bear in mind the workflow that we've allocated for this is to never publish. So we're just going to make sure that the user can only go to from a state that will stay in draft. So there's a draft only transition. We're going to make sure that both the anonymous user and authenticated users can both use that draft only transition. But just bear in mind that bakers and chefs don't really have any ability to create survey to begin with. So you can see here I've got a new survey. The ordering seems to be correct, and I can put some comments in and then submit that survey to the survey system, and then have a look at my content and see that anonymous, not verified, is in an unpublished state. So and the comments actually are the title of the page. Just bear in mind that you can't delete a title of a piece of content, but you can rename its label. So I've relabeled the name title to be comments. So I'm creating another view, a final view here, and that view will have certain permissions, and yeah, I'm sort of looking in the wrong place with regards to permissions. But yeah, there's sort of, you can get other content to look at that view, and that's not entirely the exact place. I'm sort of grappling at the wrong place, but you can sort of see that I'm sort of defining a criteria. So the published date is yes. The content type is survey. So is not yes. I'm changing the view to a table so that it shows all of the content. So you'll note that bakers and chefs can view all the surveys that came in, and I'm defining that view here just to make sure that those two users can see all of the different feedback. So what you see in this list are every single field in every single content type, and I'm sort of searching high and low for the pieces of information there, but it's quicker to use that search box up in the top left hand corner. I can search for different content types, but I can also type in the specific content type that I'm looking for, and now all of the different survey details are available. I can change the labels, I can change some of the information, but I'm happy with defaults. You can see down here there's 2 surveys that have come in. So the view system will give you a sort of a draft look of its site. So I can reorder things a little bit, just change the way that table looks, so that batch is the first thing that comes up on the left, and then the relative responses that the user gave. I want to make sure that that particular content type is that particular view type is only available to a certain role, ROLE. So it's sort of important that in the view system you define permissions as well. It's not the only place you can define permissions, but it's certainly one of many. So I'm creating a menu link, just making sure that menu link will appear in the menu system. So the right user should be able to see all of the surveys that came through the system, and I think we're logged in Chrome as a chef. So those are all the cupcakes that are listed. These are all of the surveys that came in, and draft batches is another view that only shows the cupcakes that haven't been baked. So I can change the access restriction to role, and I should be able to define a certain user that only has access to that particular content type. So just bear in mind that you can create access permissions based on role. And if I'm completely logged out, I shouldn't be able to see that. Well, that's I forgot to save. So I've changed the access permission to be on role. I've saved that, and I might go into the other content types and restrict them based on a role as well, just to make sure that people can't see draft cupcakes. They can see published cupcakes, but they can't see draft in an anonymous state. So I'm filling out another survey on Berry Vanilla Surprise, filling out contents, hitting submit button, and the survey then applies to that particular piece of content. There are no unpublished batches. All batches have been published. So I think we've pretty much got functionality sort of locked in. There might be a couple of bits of permission here and there, and just sort of running through the site one last time. We'll put in another cupcake and take it through the whole process. So I'm currently in Firefox under the Baker role, and Baker should be able to create a draft cupcake, defining its parameters, submitting it. I can then edit it or delete it if I see fit, but I can't bring that guy to production without dropping over to the different chef user and then changing his draft status to published. I still have access denied on actually viewing different things. So anyway, so you can see Baker's created a new and the chef has then taken that to a published state. Now I have a little configuration change, and I showed you at the beginning of the video where I need to turn off caching for views. So sometimes you have sort of overall configurations that need to be done. But I'm just sorting batch by a certain criteria to make sure that it only shows the latest one. So in reverse order, not sort of oldest to newest, but newest to oldest. Just because, old cupcakes won't be of interest other than the newer ones that have come through. So, so just bear in mind that it can be a little bit of a problem if the view system doesn't keep up with our published states. One way to do it is to sort of just clear out the cache, and I think that's what I'm going to do here. So there's sort of a few different ways of cleaning things up, but cache cleaning doesn't fix the entire issue. What you might want to do is just to turn off caching altogether in the views configuration area. So what am I doing? I'm just reordering the menu system to make sure that my menu system looks more or less clean. The order is right for anonymous users. So anonymous users can just see all the different cupcakes that were created and then submit a survey on one of those cupcakes. I'm having a look at the different blocks. So the thing that's immediately under the menu and the search is the actual breadcrumbs. And I'm not really super happy with the breadcrumbs because one, they're located incorrectly. I'll need to move them down a little bit. And the other is that they contain a slash instead of a caret. So I'm sort of looking for a larger than sign to be allocated to the breadcrumb system rather than the way it is at the moment. But what I'm doing is I'm confirming that I'm getting a CSS lock on the thing that I need to check. Now breadcrumbs can be, or the look and feel can be well and truly edited in CSS, but of course you want to move the different content types, so the different blocks to their sort of relevant locations, so that the menu lives in a menu area and the breadcrumbs lives just below that. So I'm just sort of reorganizing the look and feel of my site so that it has a decent sort of block structure. So blocks are an interesting way of just defining different sort of pieces of content that might appear on many different pages. There is a block type for content itself, so obviously these forms and survey lists and views and what have you are still very useful, and have to be there, but things like headers and footer options are useful. So I'm having a little bit of a look through the file system. There is actually a breadcrumb file in the Bootstrap components area, where you can change some of the features. But I've sort of realized that CSS, you should probably find all of the options of CSS before you have to go in and maybe edit some of the core files that exist, because obviously the settings themselves don't really, or the files themselves are written in such a way as to be devoid of content. They're templates by which we put content in. So I'm more or less happy with the functionality, and we're having a bit of a play with the look and feel of the site. And you can see here that I'm sort of changing the way some parts of the system will be set up. So this one here ensures that users can't self-register, and I don't want my user accounts to be gummed up with users to be moderated. So in the theme itself, I can upload a file, or I can refer to it, and I think I had some less trouble with the file type problem. So it's telling me PNG, JPEG, GIF are the only files allowed. I'm trying to place an SVG file. So what I might do is I might sort of just move the file that is the cupcake.svg file directly into an area of the themes folder, and then refer to that file, using, instead of a file upload, using path description. So I can just define the path based on the root folder of Drupal itself. It probably shouldn't have a forward slash at the beginning, because that refers to an absolute position. So just everywhere else you need the forward slash, but if you're defining a path through a file system, it makes sense not to have that prefixing forward slash. It's a bit weird, but favicons and images again can be stricken by the dreaded caching problem. So just bear in mind that both your favicon, it's already there. There's already a sort of a little blue alien type character that probably won't be replaced until we sort of clear our local cache on the browser itself, or it expires by its own. So I'm just having a look at some of the features of the theme itself. So the first step is to have a look at the options that you have for the Bootstrap theme, in just sort of giving yourself a little bit of a head start before you have to dive into CSS or the templates themselves. When you have to deal with the actual file system other than CSS, you're entering a zone of both HTML and PHP and some things called mustaches or templating pieces that dig deep into the Drupal's own internal mechanisms. So I'm sort of just checking my blocks, checking my themes, making sure that I have things positioned correctly in the site overall. But you'll you'll find that you'll play around with this quite a lot, and there's ways in which you can have content devoid of certain menus or certain themes. You can look at the content settings itself and define what blocks you want to display on a per content basis, or even a per content type basis. But we haven't sort of delved into that. We've just looked at the overall content type, so the overall view of the site itself. So I'm still fighting the breadcrumbs a little bit to try and get my all-important slash being changed to a larger than sign. And I think I've realized that the best way to do this is actually in CSS itself. And when you sort of right-click and use the inspector or the Chrome developer tools, you're able to sort of have a little bit of a play with different pieces of content. So I've defined breadcrumb li before as a way of changing the actual content, and I'm not happy with the color of that, so I might change the color from gray to the default blue or a darker gray, because it's hardly seeable. You can't really see it at all. So I'll change the color to the same gray as the others, so that it has a little bit of definition. So now it looks like breadcrumbs, because it sort of gave me a little bit of a confusion at some point. I wasn't sure what it was, and it's a better convention to use the chevron-like identifier. I'm not really happy with that line below create survey. If you can get rid of unnecessary pieces of layout, it sort of gives a bit more space to things. So again, I've right-clicked on it. I've defined the content changes that I want, and I'm just going to change the border to 0 so that that line just completely disappears. Not happy with the green color of the submit button either, so that green colored submit button needs to be changed to something. In the theme itself, we can change a little bit about the menu system, not a huge amount, but if you look at the nav bar, you can inverse the color of the nav bar and change the layout to be either absolute or fixed, but we'll keep that in flow. So now that's reversed the color, and it's sort of reversed the color to a way that suits my liking a little bit. But instead of an ugly black, I'm going to go with another tone of blue. So pasting in what I found in the developer tools, I'm going to give not navy blue. I'm checking the color names, and it'll be a dark blue or something along those lines. So I'll change the navy blue to midnight blue, and then check the layout. So now we have the midnight blue color, but the menu items don't get that all important midnight blue. So again, I'm looking at the stylings in the developer tools on the right, and then choosing extra selectors to be applied, or to get the different colors to be applied. And sometimes it's a bit hit and miss. You end up sort of maybe adding too many options to the styling area. So this one here was particularly difficult, but eventually I worked it out, and I'll work it out in the next sort of 15 minutes. Note that this particular part of the video is all styling. So we're currently sitting at a 2-hour video. And we're sort of in the last sort of last fifth of the video, but everything that I do here will be related to layout. So we're specifically playing with Bootstrap here, and trying to get Bootstrap to show an indigo color for the selected menu item, and we'll eventually get there, but we're going around in circles for the moment. You'll note that I'll head off in a whole lot of different directions before coming back to this. So for those users that just wanted to see the Drupal side of things and not the Bootstrap side of things, it might be useful to sort of skip ahead towards the end of the video where I talk about backing up the site, because we want to dump the database and we want to zip up all of the materials that we've done and potentially put into production. The concern obviously is that in a production environment you'd redefine the passwords from password to something a little bit stronger. You'd also define the database password. If you remember right back in the installation stage, that database password was nothing. It will need to be allocated as well. So as far as CSS goes, I'm sort of defining all of the colors of midnight blue to be in different parts of the site. So there's a difference between a comma in CSS and a space. The comma means we're comma delimiting different selectors, whereas the space means to select the child of the parent. So you'll find that some of the stylings will go haywire if you don't have the comma. So yeah, as I sort of clean up footer and header and menu and what have you, you'll find that they'll all sort of have a light blue, midnight blue kind of contrast. So I'll be eradicating black from the black and white from the site and just using the blues and the one highlight color, which is that olive color that's in the title. So as far as Drupal's concerned, it does use Bootstrap in the most sort of clean way possible. You can define the classes that Bootstrap understands to do your layout. So the difficulty is that if you wanted to sort of define a different layout, you have to leave CSS, because CSS by itself is only going to give you the characteristics of the styling, not the actual sort of dimension or the layout. And for that, I'm going to make one change, and that is to sort of allow the content below the header and above the footer to sit more central, because at the moment it takes up 100% of the screen, and for desktop viewing that's just not acceptable. So we will change templates, and I'll note it in the headings and put it in the table of contents for you. So have a look below this video under the table of contents, and I'll have a little discussion about templating, because I only change one thing. So I'm continuing to add more and more selectors to try and sort of attach this one active menu, and just bear in mind that developer tools are your friends. So look very closely at the selector that is being found when you're looking at different parts. So the trick that I'm tending to find is I'm right-clicking, I'm inspecting element, and the inspect element gives me a few features that I wouldn't normally get. Now you'll note here that I've got active, that color, where is it, indigo, being used incorrectly. So I've defined, or I've captured the active element, which hasn't worked out for my menu, but it's worked out for the active element in the breadcrumbs list. So I'm going to have to sort of define active to be a part of a different area. So active in the nav bar, or active in the header, or active in the nav itself. So I'm trying my hardest to define all the different nav related areas that need to get the midnight blue. So all the nav areas, and the active ones to get the indigo. So I'm going around in circles a little bit, trying to get the styling right, but It's taking a while. Those people that are very used to Bootstrap are probably, smashing the table at the moment, saying do this. But obviously, there's sort of like a little bit of debugging in the process. I'm not entirely, and I didn't really get to it either, fixing up the menus themselves, so the forms themselves. You can see the form takes up 100% of the width of the screen, which is perfect in a mobile view, but it's not acceptable in a desktop environment. In fact, the comments area down the bottom, I tried to push the size up a lot so that the size of comments could take up more room, but that wasn't acceptable either. And it has something to do with the theme more than anything else. So Bootstrap has taken input and has given it a size. So in some ways we'd have to sort of like put size none in the CSS or the size, we try to sort of like clear out size to make sure each one of those form fields takes up a different area. So I'm still having a hack, and I've managed to find some code from the developer tools that might be a little bit more useful. So I'm sort of locking on to the hover and the focus, so that it too can get the same indigo color that the other items have. So actually, that little login down the bottom is the thing that's sort of getting me. So I'm sort of defining nav li, and then finally getting a color in there. And that caret, that larger than sign, means that you want to apply the stylings to the child of the parent. So nav is the parent, li is the child. Please style the child. I'm a bit annoyed by that, and it's because the active hasn't been parented. So I'm going to make sure that only the active in the navigation system is dealt with, not the active in the breadcrumb system. So hover is when your mouse goes over, focus is when your mouse goes down. So you can style on mouse down, and by consequence mouse up, which is hover or the default. So I'm going to bootstrap.org, but obviously the wrong bootstrap.org. Just to sort of get a little bit of a inspiration from other layouts that sort of exist in the web, and I want to just sort of get my design centered a little bit, and that sort of content area, at least in desktop view, needs to be sort of compressed down. And adding an extra class or redefining an extra class in content is absolutely necessary. And in order to do this, I'm going to have to grab the right template, the content template. But at this moment in time, I'm trying to be inspired by different Bootstrap sites, none of which truly give me the information I'm looking for. Text Center, Jumbotron, that's not sort of something that I want. I'm pretty sure Jumbotron is a specific type of masthead that might sort of cycle through a number of different images on a timer. But I'm sort of going to the all-knowing oracle of everything web-related, and I'll try center-block, but it might just be center all by itself. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to dip into Bootstrap proper, so the Bootstrap that we downloaded, into templates, and I'm going to copy the one template that contains the width of 12 in my content area, and drop him down to 8 or 9 so that he doesn't take up as much room. And you can see here that the TWIG files are what contains these templates. And you can see here there's sort of a little bit of a design ethos here. So there's some if statements. So whenever you see the little question mark, there's sort of a binary choice that's made given a certain type of event. So what I'm trying to do is to change the content width to use up a little bit less space in desktop view. But I've gotten sidetracked because I've gone and styled the menus themselves. So that's not centered. That's brought it to the left, and that obviously that advice on Stack Overflow wasn't that useful. I'm continuing to read different comments, but all I'm doing is looking for the class that will give me what I'm looking for, and center block didn't work, so I'm sort of giving up on that, and I'm going to try a different styling. So center a column using Bootstrap and row centered. Text align center, text center. So it might actually be okay if I use some kind of CSS to try and sort of center it up, which might be sort of the best option. Is maybe to define a 6 or an 8 and then put the word centered in at the end. Okay, so I've changed that, but just bear in mind again, whenever you're changing templates, you might have a little bit of a problem with the Drupal caching system. So, okay, so I've put my own styling in. So I followed someone's advice and I've changed I've just added an extra class, a user defined class to define centered, which is your margin 0 auto type solution. Fine and dandy. I mean, that's one way of doing it. It would be nice if we could get Bootstrap to do it, but that's a little bit of a cheaty way. So I'll change that to 8 and give myself a little bit more room. I'm clearing cache as time goes on, just to sort of get the site to update its changes. So the layout's looking more better, but these edits windows have been styled incorrectly. I want to try and eradicate white. And in fact, when I'm not in header or footer, I don't want to see that sort of that dark blue at all. So I'm going to sort of find the selector that is related to this, and then just sort of remove it from my my area, because you can see some of that is nav related. So if you look at the top of the list items, I've gone and defined nav list item, and that's what's sort of firing off this stuff here, which isn't perfect. My preference is that this nav stuff doesn't apply to revert drafts or change content or edit content. So I'm looking to try and sort of just make sure that I'm only applying the different midnight blue and purplish colors to the header and footer. And there may be just a little bit of iterative sort of debugging going on to try and sort of clean that up. Yeah, so I'm just defining the navbar footer, but I'm not sure whether that's sort of gonna work. In fact, I'm probably gonna go backwards a little bit when that happens. I've decided to go on and sort of clean up these buttons, because the buttons themselves shouldn't be a separate color. So I'm finding where button is being used, and then defining a color for button, and taking the midnight blue color and the white color, and then allocating. Oops, that was because footer was used there and shouldn't have been. So yeah, that login form needs to have a different value allocated to it. So now the hover of that item isn't quite right. So I'm gonna change the button hover to have the indigo color, I suppose. Nav active, and so now it sort of gets a different color. So it's got the midnight blue, and now it's got the indigo, but now when you click it, it has the green. So I've got to change the hover and the active, but I want to kill the button icon. I don't want the check mark, so I'll get rid of the actual little picture that's on the left hand side of that image, and just get rid of it altogether. Notice that Bootstrap just uses classes everywhere, so never forget the prefixing dot that defines all of the different Bootstrap related elements. So if you see class being used, make sure you have a dot in the CSS. Okay, yeah, I'm just having a play, making sure that all of the different mouse over effects get the right color. So I'm just adding more selectors and comma delimiting those selectors as I go along. So I've used a combination of background color and background, and background is the more generic or the more general term. And that might not be the perfect solution in your case. So I think I finally hooked onto the right indigo color to define the right hovering on the different menu items. But I'm not sure whether the selected one has been found yet. So notice that I'm starting to define the areas, body, nav, header, footer, where these selectors are going to take place. And I'm sort of forcing the styling to just work in one specific area. So I'm reducing the effect that occurs. And if you remember, indigo started appearing in the breadcrumbs area, and it appears in the content control areas above content items. So if we end up sort of just defining how the nav bars are being affected, we're potentially just reducing the effect that it has on the outer areas. But of course, I'm going backwards a little bit. Should have defined that at the beginning, but we'll get there. So I'm just trying under different users, and sometimes you have to go backwards to go forwards, and that's just the way it is. But we noticed that the breadcrumbs don't have that indigo color on them anymore, so we've sort of gone forward in that respect. But it might be useful. Just bear in mind that I'm coming to the discovery as well that it's really useful to look at your developer tools, identify the selectors that are being affected in the areas, and then paste them into your overriding area. So I can just define footer as a whole to contain that one color, and then the menu bar, nav, and the active and the hover can get their alternative colors. So I should be able to take all the footer related stuff out of this selector, and do the same as what I did with footer and just define the header and nothing else, to get that blue color. But note that in that login area, the reset your password area, we need to get that color out. It's not technically a button, and it's not technically a header or a footer, so we're going to sort of just be more specific about our selectors. So I'm looking for where that incorrect styling is being applied, and then just saying make it header, make it a part of the header system, and then suddenly things disappear. But obviously the active is appearing, so I'll add header to these areas here, and now suddenly we've got a little bit of a change. I don't like login being white, and I want to override the background color of that active to be nothing, so I'll eventually work that one through as well. Yeah, so I'm looking for another color to add to my my repertoire, which is sky blue, to replace those white and those grey colors. But I'm sort of sitting back here. I'm having sort of misgivings about doing that now, because sky blue just introduces another color. But I mean, you've got midnight blue and indigo as two separate colors. Why can't you have sky blue and light blue as two colors as well? So, there's sort of pros and cons around all of it, especially when I've used olive in H1. So olive does actually stand out quite nicely, but maybe not with sky blue and light blue together. So I'm sort of, just in hindsight, I'm probably, not super happy with it, but it'll do. So that login needs to be given a sky blue color. So again, I'm looking at the selectors. So just make sure you look in styles below and grab the selectors that are being being affected, and I'm trying to grab the white color, and I'm looking down the bottom where the actual styles are explained to me, and then trying to copy out that selector and paste it into my layout. There we go. There's a strange little sort of halo around it as well. I'm not sure what that is, but yeah, it kind of looks like most of the styling is done. I'm pretty happy at this point in time that most of the look and feel has been defined, and I should probably go through and change all of the hovers to have actives as well, just so that the mouse down event is dealt with correctly. There's still that ugly black on survey, and I think the penny's dropped, and I need to go down to what style is being affected, and then simply paste in the exact style that's being affected, because I'm going all over the joint with trying to sort of get a finger on this little black area here, because at the moment it's trying to go indigo and light blue, but it's not going to work. So I'm trying to be inspired by the other searches that I've found, but in the end I go to the developer tools and just paste out the exact styling or the exact selector that's going to be applied. But what's happened with nav tabs and what's happened with footer needs to happen in the header area. So yeah, this is a sort of a fool's errand, a folly that didn't work, because it doesn't it doesn't apply correctly. So I'll drop my indigo in there, test it out, and nah, doesn't work. So that was a sort of an incorrect, checking the syntax, making sure there's commas where they should be, but it's not going to work. But active is certainly one of the things that we're interested in. But in the end, I click on the active list item and then sort of work through the styles that are related to that. So there's the style. No, that's not it. So the li class active is the element that we're looking for. So there it is, and navbar inverse navbar nav active a. That's quite a mouthful of selectors there that are being applied, but I'm just going to paste them straight in. Navbar inverse navbar nav active. Wow. And there it is. So the ultimate answer is to trust in your developer tools and find the selector that way. Trying to second guess can be a little bit, especially with the kinds of things that are dealt with by Drupal itself. So that active is something that's allocated not in styling but in functionality. So what I'm doing here now is I'm turning on aggregation, and I'm sort of clearing my caches and setting cache limit to about 30 minutes, just sort of in the assumption that it will go to a production environment. I'm taking the site offline, and I'm going to go through the process of zipping that sucker up and sort of compressing it down so that it then is backed up. Because my interest is in making sure that we can not only take to production, but we have a sort of a copy of our site that represents the work that we've done today. You might have seen 2 hours of it, but I certainly spent a little bit more time. So the first thing we've got to do is to, well, we'll get rid of the old backup. Go into Drupal, get rid of the SQL file that was there. So I'll just remove out the Drupal SQL. Then I'll dump MySQL, dump out the new version of the database, or the current version of the database. That's the wrong command. I've got to put MySQL dump in there. So you watch, I'll sort of recover my confusion as to why MySQL isn't starting up. And just put the word dump, D-U-M-P, and of course it's going weird because it's a video. So I'll do that again from the start. MySQL dump, no password required, Drupal is our database, and then pipe that out to, or redirect that out to Drupal.sql. Check that there's some stuff in there, and that's pure SQL. And now I'm going to go through the process of compressing and creating an archive. So I'll name the archive cupcake drupal.tar.gz, and then I'll say this is the folder that I want to compress.